The brass band blared as sunlight bounced off 1,000 graduation caps, a sea of blue and gold shimmering under the June sky. I had waited for this day for 9 years, 4 as a student, 5 clawing my way through research no one believed in. But when my phone buzzed beneath the folds of my gown, everything froze. I remember the warmth on my skin turning brittle, the laughter around me thinning like air at altitude. The message previewed on the screen was only 9 words, yet it cracked through the noise like thunder. After today, don't expect help from us. You're on your own. My father's name hovered below it. Thomas Grant, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, how to mix cement, how to measure twice before cutting once. The man who had also told me that chasing recycled materials was a fool's errand. I felt my pulse climb up my throat as if my body was trying to reject the words. The ceremony announcer was calling names in alphabetical order, and each clap of applause landed like mockery. I glanced toward the stands, scanning through the rows, until I found them, my parents' motionless specks against the blinding white of the bleachers. My father's arms were folded, his jaw, locked sunglasses reflecting nothing but the field below. My mother sat beside him, small and distant hands knotted together on her lap. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. I pressed my lips together, forcing air through my lungs like I was performing CPR on my own composure. Around me, other graduates were laughing, fixing tassels, whispering about new jobs, weddings plans for Europe. My future was a blank page. I had filled myself one I had guarded like oxygen. Yet somehow his text made it feel like paper again, thin, fragile, burnable. My best friend Maya nudged me. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you just saw a ghost." I slipped the phone back into the hidden pocket of my gown. Fine, I lied, but my voice cracked halfway through. The brass section swelled again, triumphant and oblivious, while my chest felt like concrete setting around something still alive. A child's voice somewhere shouted, "That's my mom!" and the crowd cheered louder. I looked at the stage at the banner fluttering in the wind, New Haven University class of 2025, and felt the irony bite. I had built a composite that could replace asphalt and save cities millions, but I couldn't bridge the simplest road between myself and my father. The dean stepped to the microphone, his voice booming about perseverance and legacy, about parents who sacrificed so their children could rise higher. The words stabbed with a cruel precision. I had sacrificed 2 nights' paychecks, friendships, even my health to chase a dream that my own blood dismissed. I forced myself to look up again, searching for one more glimpse, one more trace of acknowledgement. My father was talking to another man, gesturing casually as if the daughter he'd disowned by text didn't exist 50 yards away. My stomach twisted, not with anger, but with something colder clarity. He had already decided who I was in his story. A disappointment, a failure dressed in borrowed hope. But my story wasn't ending here. The sunlight caught the edges of my diploma folder, still empty, a promise not yet sealed. My fingers tightened around it until the cardboard creaked. I whispered to myself low enough that only the wind could hear, "You'll regret sending that text." And in that quiet vow, the pain hardened into purpose. The phrase, "be realistic," had followed me like a ghost for years, stitched into every doubt I'd ever had about myself. It started 3 summers ago in the smell of tar and machine oil inside my father's workshop, where the air shimmered with heat and impatience. I was 26 then, hair tied back, holding the first rough sample of my recycled composite panel. It was crude, uneven, but it worked. I remember placing it on his workbench, proud and nervous, explaining how it could replace petroleum asphalt using polymer-infused waste. For a moment, he actually listened, then the smirk appeared. "You're building dreams, not roads," he said, tossing the prototype aside like scrap. "Be realistic, Olivia." His words landed heavier than the tools on the wall. That was the day I stopped trying to win his approval. I packed up my laptop, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint, and traded stability for belief. My mother tried to mediate, but her loyalty was a quiet, fearful one. She lived between his temper and my stubbornness. "He just doesn't understand," she'd whisper. Give him time. Time, I learned, doesn't change people who think they already own the truth. The next few years became a collection of sacrifices, skipping meals to pay for lab equipment, working overnight shifts to fund experiments, sleeping on couches near the university lab when I couldn't afford rent. I sold my car to buy chemical resin. I ruined my hands mixing compounds that never set right. And every time something failed, I heard his voice again. Be realistic. When I finally secured a small government grant, he refused to co-sign the facility lease, saying, "I'm not funding your science fair." That night, sitting alone with a microwave meal, I almost called to tell him he was right. Instead, I opened my laptop and rewrote my proposal. I didn't need him. I needed results. Every disappointment hardened into quiet steel. By year 2, I'd lost friends who thought I was obsessed, dated men who said I was married to my project, and carried guilt like a second spine. But the work started to show promise. My material held weight under pressure tests. When the university declined further support, I applied for private grants under a new name, hiding my gender, my history. Everything tied to the daughter of Thomas Grant. I wanted to be judged by merit, not by legacy. When EcoSynthetics called back for a partnership trial, I worked 78 hours straight to deliver data. My palms blistered, my eyes burned, but for the first time, hope felt solid. Still, even then, a small part of me wished he would call just to say he'd read about it, even if it was only to argue. He never did. My father's silence became its own kind of punishment, proof that even success could vanish into denial. But the phrase stayed with me almost like armor. Whenever investors questioned the scale of my idea, I'd think, be realistic. Then I'd smile and double the numbers. It became fuel, a challenge to outgrow his shadow. By the time graduation arrived, my research had evolved into a company quietly on the edge of something monumental, but I hadn't told him. I wanted the truth to reach him in a way he couldn't control, without me pleading, without me explaining. I wanted reality to knock on his door and introduce itself. And yet, even as I walked across that stage, part of me still looked toward the stands, hoping maybe he'd look proud, maybe he'd nod once, maybe something in him had softened. Instead, I found only that same folded arm posture, that same disapproval, disguised as dignity. The memory of be realistic pressed down on me again, but this time it didn't crush it, defined. I was no longer asking to be believed. I was preparing to be proven right. The air shimmered above the rows of graduates, the brass band pounding like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. I was still staring straight ahead, jaw locked, when Maya leaned over again, whispering, "You're gripping that folder like you want to break it in half." I loosened my hold, forcing my fingers to unclench. The phone was still in my pocket, hot against my leg, as if the words on its screen were alive. I didn't have to read them again. They were carved into my mind already. "Don't expect help from us. You're on your own." Maya caught my silence and reached out. "Liv," she murmured. "What happened?" I didn't answer, but the pause gave me away. In one quick motion, she slid her hand into my pocket, snatched the phone, and read. Her breath hitched. "He sent this now." I turned my face away, but the sound of her disbelief drew a few curious glances from the row behind us. "You've got to be kidding me," she hissed. "What kind of person tries to humiliate their daughter at graduation?" I looked at her eyes steady. "He doesn't see it as humiliation," I said. "He sees it as reality correction." The words tasted bitter. Somewhere behind the faculty line, a cheer erupted as another graduate received their diploma. I clapped politely, pretending my chest wasn't caving in. Maya muttered, "He just couldn't let you have one day." I didn't answer because she was right. My father had a talent for choosing moments when pride was supposed to bloom and burning them down instead. The memory of his last words before I moved out echoed. "You'll come crawling back when the world stops pretending your ideas matter." Maybe this text was his way of making sure the crawl stayed permanent. The dean's voice thundered through the speakers, praising the graduates' families for their support. I almost laughed. I turned toward the stands again, as if I could will him to look different this time. But there he was, Thomas Grant, shaking hands, smiling at old colleagues, looking as if this entire day had been built on his sacrifice, not mine. I watched him speak to a man 2 rows down, his voice just loud enough to carry. "She's on her phone again. probably calling another investor for mercy. A few people around him chuckled. My stomach twisted. Maya heard it too. "That's not a dad," she said flatly. "That's a PR problem in human form." My throat burned, but I swallowed it back. The applause for another name filled the space where my rage wanted to live. I couldn't let it spill. Not here, not like this. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and whispered to myself, "Breathe. Don't give him what he wants." Maya leaned closer. "What does he want?" "A reaction," I said quietly. "He wants to prove I'm still the angry kid who doesn't know when to stop dreaming." The crowd began to chant another graduate's name, the sound rolling across the stadium like surf. I sat back, straightened my shoulders, and fixed my gaze on the stage. Every cell in my body screamed to stand up, to shout, to defend myself, but I stayed still. Stillness could be louder than fury. If he wanted a show, he wouldn't get one. The real scene, the one that would end this war, was already waiting in my pocket, buried under the same phone that had carried his insult. A different vibration was coming. I could feel it, a low hum of change, patient and sharp. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was close enough to power. 6 months before graduation, I thought my father was starting to change. It was late October, rain drumming against the metal roof of the test facility I'd rented with borrowed money. I'd emailed him an invitation to the demonstration of my newest composite blend, a formula that replaced nearly half of the petroleum base in asphalt with recycled polymer. To my surprise, he'd replied, "I'll stop by." Those 3 words nearly undid me. I spent the entire night cleaning the lab, lining up the samples, rehearsing my presentation, as if I were speaking before Congress. When his truck pulled up the next afternoon, headlights cutting through the drizzle, my heart jumped. He stepped out in his worn brown jacket, the one that smelled like sawdust and diesel, and for a moment I saw not the critic, but the father I used to build model bridges with on weekends. I greeted him with a hopeful smile and launched into the test results showing how my formula could cut city costs by 20% while reducing landfill waste. He stood with hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the samples, nodding once or twice. When I finished, there was a pause, heavy but expectant. Then he said it, voice flat as steel. "This is cute, but it'll never replace real asphalt." He turned, opened the door, and the rain swallowed him before I could answer. I stood there with my clipboard pressed to my chest, watching the red taillights fade. The sound of the rain on the tin roof became applause for a tragedy I hadn't realized was playing out. That was the first time I understood that hope could bruise like a body. I didn't cry then. I went back to my desk, wrote down every criticism he'd made over the years, and turned each one into a column of measurable data. If he said it wasn't durable, I would prove tensile strength. If he said it wouldn't bond under heat, I'd build a test chamber that mimicked Arizona highways. Hope became math. Pain became precision. By winter, I had improved the blend's resistance by 15%. I sent another report to him this time through my mother's email. No response. In January, our family's small construction business nearly went bankrupt due to supply chain issues, and instead of calling me the daughter whose company specialized in sustainable replacements, he took a private loan from investors who bled him in interest. I watched from afar, powerless and furious. He would rather fail than admit I might succeed. Yet when the first field test for my material passed inspection in March, something inside me softened again. Maybe he just needed proof on paper. Maybe that's how men like him loved quietly through scrutiny. I mailed him the certification results with a handwritten note. "Thought you'd want to see this." Weeks passed. Nothing. When my phone finally rang one evening with his name on the screen, I answered so fast I nearly dropped it. "Dad." Silence. Then a sigh. "I heard you're still at that waste project." "It's called Ecosynthetics now," I said, my voice shaking. "We got our first municipal approval." "Good for you," he said, each word polished in sarcasm. "Just remember, cities change their minds fast." He hung up before I could reply. I stared at the dark screen, my reflection warped in the glass. That night, I sat on the floor beside my desk, surrounded by blueprints, and felt hope die quietly. But something else was born in its place, resolve. If love couldn't bridge the gap, maybe success would. I whispered into the silence. One day, you'll see this wasn't a waste. When graduation day came, I had buried that hope deep layered under years of exhaustion and sacrifice. Yet the sight of him sitting up there, arms crossed, still had the power to split it open again. Hope was a scar it healed, but never without leaving its shape behind. The brass section hit another triumphant chord, and I forced myself to breathe with the rhythm, letting the sound cover the tremor in my hands. Then beneath the swell of trumpets and applause, my phone vibrated again. For a split second, I thought it was another message from my father. A second cut. Maybe another reminder that I was alone. But the name on the screen wasn't his. Elena Brooks. My breath caught. Elena was the COO of Ecosynthetics, my partner, my quiet anchor through every sleepless prototype night. She never called during ceremonies unless something had exploded or evolved. The text was short. Series C just closed. Call me ASAP. My pulse spiked. Series C. We had been courting Horizon Materials for months, a billion-dollar industrial giant that could push us into a new orbit. I looked at Maya, who was mouthing, "What's wrong?" and raised a single finger to my lips. The band drowned the moment as I hunched forward, letting my hair fall like a curtain around my face. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Tell me you're not calling to say it fell through," I whispered. Elena's voice came quick, steady, electric. "It didn't fall through. It flew. Horizon came in big, 150 million. We're officially valued at 1.2 billion pre-money. For a heartbeat, I couldn't hear. The crowd couldn't feel the seat beneath me. It was like gravity had paused to listen. "Elena," I murmured. "Are you sure?" She laughed softly, her voice breaking with emotion. "Madison, they signed 2 hours ago. The news embargo lifts this afternoon." "You did it. We did it." The words struck like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. My throat tightened, and for once I couldn't speak. All the nights of failure, the burns on my hands, the cheap meals, the rejections, they collapsed into something clean, something undeniable. "Our Detroit pilot's been approved too," Elena added. "They're calling it the first full-scale rollout of sustainable composite paving in North America. You're about to make history, Olivia." I shut my eyes, the words pulsing through me. Make history. A tremor of laughter slipped out, small but unstoppable. Maya caught the sound, puzzled. I hung up just as the dean announced another graduate's name. My fingers were trembling as I slid the phone back into my pocket. Maya leaned in again. "What is it?" she whispered. I exhaled slowly, barely containing the shake in my chest. "It's big," I said. "Bigger than I ever imagined." "Then smile," she urged, nudging my arm. "Because he's watching." I turned, and there he was. My father, 2 sections up, the sunlight catching the gray in his hair, his face unreadable. Maybe he thought my smile meant surrender, that I was pretending things were fine. But the truth was simpler, sharper. I was smiling because at that very moment, his version of reality had expired. He just didn't know it yet. The stadium noise returned in waves, the music, the cheers, the rustle of robes. But it all sounded different now, softer, more distant, as if I had stepped into a world that had already moved past his judgment. Inside my pocket, the phone buzzed again, a new notification lighting the screen. "Incoming press embargo lifts in 2 hours." I whispered under my breath, "Let it ring." And this time the words didn't carry pain. They carried power. The sun climbed higher, casting a white glare across the rows of mortarboards. The dean's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, but all I could hear was the thud of my pulse. I'd just sealed a deal worth more than my father's entire company, and yet here I was, sitting in the same stadium where he'd taught me to cheer for other people's victories. The irony was surgical. Maya squeezed my hand once before pulling away as if she sensed what was coming. I didn't have to wait long. A shift in the crowd's hum told me before I even looked up he was moving. My father had left the bleachers and was making his way down toward the graduate rows, shaking hands, nodding to familiar faces. He'd always been a master of small performances of pretending humility while sharpening humiliation into a blade. Still chasing fairy tales, I heard him say his tone just loud enough to travel across the space. The words wrapped in laughter, but the precision was deliberate. Probably on the phone begging for investors again. She doesn't quit, I'll give her that. A few men nearby chuckled politely. My body went cold, not from shock, but from recognition. This was the rhythm of his cruelty, always public, always disguised as charm. I felt Maya stiffen beside me. "You've got to be kidding," she whispered. "He's doing this here." I didn't answer. Instead, I looked straight ahead at the stage where another graduate was shaking hands with the chancellor. My father's voice floated closer. "Dreamers make for good headlines," he said to someone behind me. "Just not payroll." Something inside me clicked quiet but final, like a lock turning. The pain didn't flare anymore. It solidified. I remembered being 16, showing him a science fair ribbon and hearing trophies don't build houses. I remembered being 20, calling home from college to say I'd made Dean's List and hearing grades don't pour concrete. And now, 29, the same dismissal recycled like the material he mocked. He was consistent, at least. "Don't," Maya said, reading my posture. "Don't let him win." I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too tight. "Winning means playing his game," I murmured. "I've built my own." I could feel his presence behind me now, close enough that the scent of his cologne cedar and fuel cut through the spring air. "Olivia," he said, his voice suddenly mild. "How's the scrap business? Still pretending to change the world?" My muscles coiled, but I didn't turn. "Good to see you, Dad." The words were level rehearsed a line from a play I'd already outgrown. "Graduation suits you," he continued, the faux warmth slipping back into mockery. "What's next? A talk show?" "Maybe," I said, quietly, eyes fixed forward. "You might want to tune in." For the first time, the silence after his laughter wasn't painful. It was anticipation. He didn't know that while he was spitting out another insult, my name was already printing on national press releases announcing the partnership that would change everything he believed about what was possible. His world and mine were seconds away from colliding, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Maya leaned close enough for only me to hear. "He's about to eat those words," she whispered. I nodded once, steady my heart slowing to a controlled beat. "Not yet," I said. "Let him finish the show, because some truths don't need anger to land, they need timing, and mine was coming perfectly orchestrated with an audience he'd never intended to give me." My name echoed across the stadium speakers, Olivia Grant, Doctor of Engineering. The words rippled through the air, swallowed by the crowd's cheers, but my focus had narrowed to the name flashing on my phone screen. Jonathan Wu. Horizon Materials. My breath hitched. Jonathan never called casually. This was the kind of call people waited years for. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then lifted the phone to my ear, lowering my head so the robe's hood shielded me from view. Dr. Grant came, his voice smooth and steady, carrying that quiet authority that could calm a boardroom. "I wanted to be the first to congratulate you." "Sir," I said softly, unsure if I was hearing right. "We've finalized the 10-year partnership with the Department of Transportation. The paperwork's signed. Your composite blend will replace traditional asphalt in their federal infrastructure initiative. Horizon is backing full-scale production starting next quarter." I blinked the world around me, blurring into color and noise. Are you serious?" Jonathan chuckled. "You've been under review for 6 months. You didn't think I'd call to chat, did you?" I felt something release inside my chest, a tether snapping between the person I'd been and the one who now stood beneath the open sky. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling despite myself. "Don't thank me," he said. "You earned this. You turned skepticism into science. Now we turn science into legacy." My lips parted, but before I could answer, the sound of clapping caught my attention. I looked up and froze. My father had left his seat. He was 2 sections down, walking slowly toward the aisle, flanked by people shaking his hand, offering smiles. He looked every inch the proud parent, the patriarch, accepting congratulations for something he hadn't built. He didn't even look at me. Not once. Jonathan's voice broke through my daze. "Oh, and one more thing. We'll announce the partnership publicly this afternoon. Expect calls from Bloomberg and Forbes. Your name will be everywhere." The word everywhere seemed to vibrate through me like an echo from another lifetime. All the nights I'd cried in silence, all the times I'd swallowed pride, just to keep building now condensed into this single breath. "Jonathan," I said quietly, "you just changed my life." "No," he replied. "You did that yourself." I hung up as the next name was called. Around me, people were cheering, hugging, throwing their caps in the air. Maya's voice came faintly from beside me, trembling. "Liv." What was that call? I turned to her, eyes bright but calm. That was the sound of every "be realistic" I ever heard collapsing. I stood, diploma folder clutched against my chest, and looked toward the field entrance. My father was near the front row now, laughing with someone from the local Chamber of Commerce, his hand resting casually on the railing. He was performing his favorite trick, rewriting history while it was still being lived. "Still chasing pipe dreams," I heard him say again, softer this time, but it carried. The man beside him laughed. "She's on the phone again, probably begging for grants." The words no longer stung. They rang hollow, outdated, a script from a play that had already closed. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need him to know yet. The truth was on its way, and it would arrive louder than any argument. I felt Maya's hand brush mine, grounding me. "Are you going to tell him?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I'm going to let him hear it." The band struck up another march, brass glittering in the sunlight. The field shimmered with motion robes, Cap's banners, life moving forward, while he still stood anchored in disbelief. He didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him was already shifting, paved with something he'd once called impossible. The irony was exquisite. His company had built roads his whole life. Mine was about to build the future beneath them. The applause swelled as the next line of graduates stepped up, tassels swaying in rhythm, sunlight flickering across the field like a pulse. My name had already been called, but I hadn't moved. My fingers brushed the edge of my phone again, the weight of it almost humming with what it held. Maya leaned close, whispering, "He's still talking about you." I didn't need to look up to know she was right. My father's voice carried easily low, confident, the kind people automatically trusted because it sounded like authority. "She's a dreamer," he said to someone nearby. "Always was. One day she'll realize this world doesn't run on wishful thinking." I could have ignored him. I could have let him keep his illusion intact for one more hour. But as the stadium's big screen flickered to life, broadcasting close-ups of smiling students and proud parents, I realized something: the world didn't need to wait for justice. It was already here, vibrating in the space between silence and revelation. My phone buzzed again. Jonathan Wu's name appeared one more time, but this wasn't a call, it was a notification. Horizon Materials officially announces partnership with Eco-Synthetics for National Infrastructure Initiative. Underneath it, a line of text press release, live. "Congratulations, Dr. Grant." My breath caught. Maya's eyes widened as I turned the phone toward her. She gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. "Olivia, oh my God, it's everywhere!" She showed me the screen, and there it was, my name on Bloomberg's ticker, Forbes, Reuters. I looked back toward the stands. My father was shaking hands with the same man from before, the easy smile on his face, unwavering. "Probably begging investors," he said again, but now the words sounded distant, like a recording played from another lifetime. I stood. Maya grabbed my wrist. "Liv, what are you doing?" "Finishing something." I said, my voice low but sure. I stepped out from the row, the hem of my gown brushing against the grass. Heads turned. A camera followed instinctively. Graduation ceremonies, love moments of movement. I tapped my phone, then pressed the speaker icon. "Jonathan." My voice carried softly, almost lost beneath the crowd noise. But the line clicked open, and his voice came clear, smooth as glass. "Dr. Grant." I was just about to call again. "You're on speaker," I said. Mind giving a quick summary? He didn't hesitate. "Of course. Eco-Synthetics has officially secured a 10-year federal partnership. Horizon Materials is committing $150 million in funding. You've outperformed every existing competitor. Effective today, your composite formula will replace traditional asphalt in multiple state contracts." The words rolled through the speakers, amplified by the mic still active on the stadium stage. For a second, the world seemed to pause, sound pulled thin, time holding its breath. I didn't need to turn to know what was happening behind me. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Cameras shifted. The hum of confusion spread like a ripple through the crowd, and then one voice broke through it. My father's. Wait. He said the word barely audible but full of disbelief. He took a step forward, shading his eyes as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Jonathan kept speaking. It's an honor to support a visionary who refused to compromise her ideals. You're not just changing an industry, Dr. Grant. You're changing its foundation. I smiled, my pulse steady. Thank you, Jonathan. I think the right people are listening. And then I ended the call. Silence stretched thin, trembling at the edge of collapse. Maya's voice came out in a whisper. He heard every word. I nodded, the air between us charged clean. Good, I said. Now it's his turn to be realistic. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. The stadium seemed to lose its rhythm. Even the brass band faltered, horns hanging mid-note. I stood there in the open, my phone still in my hand, the last echo of Jonathan's words hanging above the crowd like the final toll of a bell. I didn't need to look at my father to know what had changed. The energy had shifted. The laughter that had always followed his jokes didn't come this time. I could feel the ripple of awareness spreading through the nearby rows, one whispered question at a time. Did she just say, Horizon Materials Ecosynthetics, wasn't that the company in Bloomberg this morning? Maya stepped beside me, her voice low but trembling with awe. Olivia, the entire section is staring. I inhaled deeply, the scent of cut grass and summer air washing over me like clarity. Let them, I murmured. They should see what quiet looks like when it wins. The dean, still at the podium, hesitated before regaining his composure and moving on with the next name. I took that as my cue to return to my seat. As I did, I passed within a few feet of my father. He was frozen in place, mouth slightly open, the sun reflecting off the lenses of his sunglasses so I couldn't see his eyes. But I didn't need to. His silence was louder than any insult he'd ever thrown. When I reached my chair, Maya leaned in close. You didn't raise your voice, she said softly. You didn't even look at him. That's terrifying. I gave a small laugh that didn't reach my eyes. That's justice, I said, the kind that doesn't need witnesses to know it's real. Up in the stands, my mother's hand touched his arm, a small, hesitant motion. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. It struck me then that she'd been living between two worlds for years, one ruled by his stubborn certainty, and one defined by the possibility I'd refused to surrender. Maybe now, finally, she could breathe in the space between them. My phone buzzed again, vibrating with a flood of notifications. Forbes, the woman reinventing America's roads. TechCrunch Ecosynthetics valued at $1.2 billion. The headlines came like waves. Validation turned into ink. I locked the screen and slid the phone into my robe pocket. This wasn't about bragging rights. It was about reclaiming truth from those who had twisted it. The stadium noise began to return, hesitant at first, then building. Someone clapped from the far end of the field, slow, deliberate. Then another joined. Within seconds, the applause spread, uncertain but growing, until it filled the air. I didn't look for its source. I just sat still, feeling each sound thread through me like release. Maya whispered, "They're clapping for you." "No," I said. "They're clapping for possibility." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My father was lowering himself back into his seat, his posture deflated. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. From where I sat, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was gravity easing its hold. There was no need for revenge anymore. The numbers had spoken louder than any raised voice. They had taken his favorite weapon, public perception, and rewritten it in real time. "That's what you once called a fantasy, Dad," I murmured to myself. "Welcome to reality." The band began a gentler melody, violins threading through the wind. The sky overhead was a clean, unbroken blue, the kind of color that didn't need to prove itself to be beautiful. I closed my eyes for one breath, feeling the world tilt toward balance. When I opened them again, my father was staring straight ahead, hands still clasped, a man forced to sit inside. The silence he had once imposed on everyone else. Justice didn't roar that day. It didn't even whisper. It simply existed steady and undeniable, like the road we would one day build quiet beneath the weight, but unbreakable all the same. News traveled faster than pride could recover. By the next morning, headlines painted a picture my father could no longer edit. Local asphalt company loses federal bid to sustainable alternative. Ecosynthetics, led by Dr. Olivia Grant, to replace outdated materials across Midwest infrastructure projects. His name appeared only once in a footnote buried under a paragraph about legacy competitors unwilling to adapt. When I read it, I didn't smile. It wasn't joy I felt. It was the strange, weightless calm that comes when a storm finally runs out of rain. The phone in my apartment rang all day, reporters, investors, old classmates who suddenly remembered my number. I turned most of them down. The only call I answered came from my mother. Her voice was cautious, almost fragile. "He saw the papers," she said. "He didn't go to work." "He doesn't have to," I replied quietly. "The contracts are gone. The city of Detroit pulled his bid this morning. He says it's temporary." "It's not." There was silence on the other end, filled with the static of things we'd never said. Then she whispered, "He's proud, Olivia. He just doesn't know how to say it." I leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the skyline blurred by heat. "That's the problem, Mom," I said. "He spent his whole life thinking silence was strength. It's just cowardice dressed in dignity." Later that afternoon, the news confirmed what I already knew. Grant Asphalt had lost not only the Detroit project, but also its contract with the Department of Transportation terminated due to failure to meet new environmental compliance standards. Every report traced the shift to technological advancements led by ecosynthetics. My father had built roads for 40 years. I had replaced them in 4. Yet there was no glee in the victory, only consequence. At dusk, I drove past his company's lot. The gates were locked, the equipment still. The sign out front, Grant Asphalt and Paving, since 1984, was missing 2 letters, rusted and sun-faded. I parked for a moment, the air thick with the scent of tar and old memories. This was the smell of my childhood, the weight of summers spent handing him tools, listening to him talk about hard work and realism. I wondered if he ever realized that the daughter he'd tried to protect from disappointment had learned resilience by surviving him. When I drove away, the radio played a news segment about the new funding for sustainable infrastructure, my name mentioned again. Dr. Grant's innovation is being hailed as the future of American roads. The reporter's voice faded as I turned off the radio. I didn't need to hear more. Justice had already done its work. The empire that mocked evolution had crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. My father's company was gone. My company was thriving. But neither felt like triumph. They felt like balance long overdue, quietly delivered. A week later, I was back in the lab, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the faint chemical scent that always clung to progress. My team had gone home hours earlier, leaving only the soft flicker of monitors reflecting off the polished concrete. That was when I heard the slow creak of the door. I turned, expecting a delivery driver or the janitor. Instead, it was him. My father stood in the doorway, shoulders slightly stooped, the proud edges of his frame dulled by exhaustion. He looked older than I remembered, his skin grayer, his hands trembling just enough to betray the weight he carried. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said quietly. "Neither was I," he replied, voice raspier than I expected. "But your mother said you'd still be working late." "She knows you." He stepped farther into the light, his gaze sweeping over the rows of prototypes, the technical charts on the walls, the busy silence of creation. "So this is where all the impossible happens," he murmured. "This is where it began," I said, nodding toward a small metal panel on the shelf, the first crude prototype I'd built in his workshop years ago. The edges were uneven, its surface dull, but I'd kept it. He stared at it for a long time, something fragile flickering behind his eyes. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He held it out to me with a hand that shook slightly. "I think this belongs to you." I hesitated before taking it. I didn't need to unfold it to know what it was. The words were etched into me long before ink had faded. "Be realistic." I unfolded it anyway. The handwriting was still bold, but the paper had softened, worn by time, by regret. "Why bring this?" I asked. He took a slow breath, his eyes steady but clouded. Because I was wrong, he said. Not just about your work, about you. The words landed like glass breaking softly against the floor. He kept talking, his voice uneven. I told myself I was protecting you from disappointment. I thought if I kept you grounded, you wouldn't fall as hard when things didn't work out. But all I did was make sure you had to rise without me. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat, threatening to unravel everything I'd held together. You didn't just doubt me, I said, my voice low. You made me doubt myself. He nodded, shame etched deep into the lines on his face. I know, and that's something I'll live with. I looked down at the note, the words that had once been a wound, now just marks on paper. The Detroit pilot outperformed your company's old formula, I said. 25% cost reduction. You could have been part of it. His eyes closed for a moment. I read the reports, he whispered. You saved a lot of people's jobs. Not for you, I said softly. For them. A silence settled between us, not hostile, not cold, but dense with history. Then he said something I'd never expected to hear from him. I'm ashamed, Olivia, but I'm proud too. I don't know how those two things fit together, but they do. I folded the note again and handed it back to him. He shook his head. Keep it, he said quietly. It's part of your story now. I slid it into my coat pocket, feeling its weight change, no longer an anchor, but a relic. I never needed saving Dad, I said, my voice steady, but somehow I ended up saving you. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like surrender. Maybe you did, he said. We stood there a moment longer, just breathing the same air, the silence not sharp anymore, just full. The morning sunlight poured through the wide windows of the lab, golden and clean, washing over rows of equipment and blueprints like quiet applause. I sat at my desk, coffee cooling beside a stack of reports, reading an email that didn't seem real even after the third time. From White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, subject invitation to join the National Sustainable Infrastructure Advisory Council. For a few seconds, I just stared, feeling my pulse sink with the soft hum of the machines. The government wanted my input mine on the future of the country's infrastructure. I'd built something that mattered, something solid enough to reach places where names like mine had never been spoken before. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly, a sound half like relief and half disbelief. The folded note was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, running a thumb along its worn crease. Be realistic. The words no longer carried their old weight. They were just history now, evidence of what used to limit me. My phone buzzed again, a text from Maya. Full circle live. You turned rejection into blueprint. I smiled, letting the words sink in. Outside, the sound of construction drifted from the street, the rhythmic grind of machines laying down new pavement. For a moment, I wondered if the materials beneath them were mine, if the road they were building carried even a small piece of my formula. The thought made my chest tighten with something that felt like gratitude. I stood stretching and walked toward the window. Across the street, a little boy held his father's hand, pointing up at a billboard that read, Eco-Synthetics Building Tomorrow Today. The image on the ad wasn't mine, but it didn't have to be. The work was out there now, living on its own. My reflection caught in the glass, older, steadier, but lighter. I thought about my father, wondering if he'd seen the same billboard, if he'd paused to realize that everything he'd once dismissed as a dream had become the foundation others would stand on. My phone rang again. For a moment, I didn't recognize the number. When I answered, a familiar voice came through, quiet but certain. It's me, he said. Your mother wanted me to tell you congratulations. I said nothing at first. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just fragile. Then he added, I saw the interview. You did good, Olivia. You built something that lasts. His voice caught on the last word, and I could almost see him, the man who once shouted orders on job sites, now speaking like he was afraid to break what had finally healed. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. I was wrong about a lot, he admitted, but not about this. A pause. You never quit. You taught me not to, I said. The line stayed open for a few seconds longer, no anger left to fill the spaces. When it ended, I stood by the window a while longer, watching sunlight scatter across the glass until everything blurred into brightness. That evening, as the city lights began to rise, I took one final walk through the lab before locking up. The prototypes gleamed under the fluorescent light, each one a fragment of the journey, the failures, the victories, the sacrifices that had built a life from disbelief. Near the door, I paused, unfolding the note one last time. The ink had faded a little, more edges curling. I smiled and whispered, "I was realistic, Dad, just not in the way you meant." I placed it in a drawer beneath the first prototype and turned off the light. Outside, the streets glowed with the reflection of 1,000 moving cars, their tires rolling over new pavement, stronger, cleaner mine. The sound was soft but steady, a rhythm that felt like forgiveness.